In this tutorial, we're going to be looking at how to do this. So the task is to pass on an animation that is a position animation onto a rotation animation onto a scale animation with 3 different shapes, but to have a smooth and credible sense of how it works. And the key to all of this, really more than anything, is in your graph editor, understanding acceleration and deceleration and how that can impact on the next layer. We start off with this unanimated version. You can see here we've got some guides set up which we need to straighten out to line up with our rectangle here, or our cross here. We're starting with a rectangular shape which we need to position correctly. By the way, if you're wondering, hey, where do those guides come from? In order to see those guides, you need to show the rulers, Control-R, and then you can drag down guides out from the rulers like this. And if you're doing something like this where you want to line things up, it is very handy. You can hide the guides by going up to View, or else do Control-semicolon to hide them. So we've got our rectangle cutting to our cross, cutting to our circle. And let's just look at just check that the circle is lined up correctly. Okay, the rectangle here needs to go like that. The cross is okay. Rectangle, it's a little bit off, but that's okay. And the circle, we want this. I'm using the arrow keys right now to get by. Okay, so that gets us our shapes lined up. So we're doing a position animation on the rectangle for starters. So we're going to go P for position. I've got my X and Y position already separated, but if you haven't got them separated, you need to go right click, separate dimensions. The reason I'm separating them is I'm only animating on the y-axis, and I'll have more accurate control on the value graph rather than the speed graph for what I want to do. So with the Y position, I'm going to click and move it, pressing the Shift key, so click, press Shift key, move it up off screen like that. Keyframe it. I'm going to go to the point at which it hits the ground just before the cross there, and I'm going to use the slider to bring its position down. I'm going to reveal my guides, Control-semicolon there, and make sure that I'm having the impact at the right point. Okay, so I've got an animation, and I just want to see how that lines up by cutting to the next frame. That should do okay. So let me just take that one frame over. So that it looks like it's moving down. So I've got an animation, it's coming in, and we're cutting to the rectangle, but it's not going to be a very credible animation. So the reason why is because we haven't done anything to control the pace of the motion. So when you're working with animation, it's a good idea to set the work area to the part of the timeline that you're working with only. Then if you go up to your preview, just specify that your range is the work area and that you're playing from the start of the range. That way, when I press the space bar, it's going to go over and over and over my work area again, and I'll see how effective it is. So the we want a sense of acceleration as this comes towards the ground. We want a sense that's like a hammer hit with a real thunk. So we're going to select the keyframes for the position. I'm going to press F9 just to turn them to easy ease keyframes. I'm going to go into my graph editor. Let's resize some of our panels. I'm going to click on my zoom extents on the graph editor, and we've got our two positions there. Oh, I meant to separate out the dimensions, so let's do that now. Separate dimensions, and I'm going to turn off, I don't need any animation on the X, just on the Y. So with easy ease, I'll get slow out, even speed, and then slow in. Something like that, which isn't, it's better than what we had, but it's not what I want. I want it to hit in with a bang. So this keyframe in particular, the end one, needs to be something more like that. So the more vertical that slope, the faster it's going to hit the ground. So now I'm getting much more of a hammer hit, and I can exaggerate that effect by doing something like that. If I bring this keyframe down too flat, it's going to be too slow out. So let's do something about that. So I'm getting that sense of a whack, and with that whack, suddenly the transition from the rectangle into the cross is becoming more believable, because the impact of the whack is like a cause that makes us expect an effect, and the effect in this case is the shape change. So next thing we want to do is start rotating the cross. So if we go to the first frame of the cross, I'm going to press R for rotation, and I'm going to keyframe it. I'm going to go to the last frame of the cross, press R for rotation, and press 180. So I'm going to do a 180-degree rotation on that. So let's look what that looks like. So I'm just going to, my work area, overlap the two. So it's credible enough. We get that sense of impact causing the rotation, but the problem is there is no sense of it having an explosive effect when it hits and then slowing down. So again, we collect those two rotation keyframes, go into the graph editor. We are going to select the two of them together like that, press F9. Now we've got an ease in and ease out. What I want to do is have it more explosive at the start and then gradually slow down. So again, I want it to be more vertical, to be more explosive. And that's much better. It's giving a sense of a and slowing down. I want it not to be quite as slow out though. So by just tweaking these curves a little bit, I'm getting, that really feels now that it's being caused by the effect of the gravity falling on the initial hammer blow. So next thing we want to do is pass the rotation of the cross onto the circle. Now, to help with the illusion of switching from the cross to the circle, I'm going to put an effect called spherize on the cross. So if I go to my effects window, it's in under distort, effects, distort, spherize. And I'm going to just keyframe maybe about 5 frames before its completion. Keyframe the radius, I'm going to drag it to just before it starts to spherize, just there. That's my starting point, 136. And then on the final frame, just before the circle, we can drag this to just a hint that it's about to achieve that circular format. So we're going in like that, and the spherize is going to allow us make the jump into the circle like that. Just want to check my alignment there between the circle and the square because or this cross because they don't seem to be lining up. So I'm going to show my guides once more. I want to go to the circle that's lined up, and that one is a bit bigger than that. So let's take the circle then and make it slightly bigger. What I'm just going to do is temporarily overlap the circle here like that. So I'm just taking the circle a frame forward, and I can press S for scale and drag it up to the roughly the outer bounds of the sphere. Okay, so now we're getting, that's a much more credible transition. So we're going from that into that. So with the circle, we're going to do a scale animation, keyframe the scale, and we're going to go to the end of the piece then. And we want the circle to have scaled down to 0 at that point. So we're going to set the scale to 0. Hang on, let's go back to the start. Now we've keyframed the start, so let's keyframe it to 0. And we do something like that. So we've got our circle. And again, because of the spherize, we've got quite a credible transition from the cross to the circle. But it's a bit of a flat, again, it's a linear animation. So what we're going to do with the circle is I'm going to take the 2 scale keyframes, going into the graph editor. I'm going to just make sure they're both selected, press F9 for easy ease. So what I want to do with this is I want a bit of anticipation and follow through on the circle. So it's going to start, instead of by starting to decrease in scale, it's going to start by increasing in scale, almost like it's going to prepare itself for the coming action. And then when it comes to the end, we want it to do the opposite. We want it to overshoot. So let's just frame that a bit better. We might need to tweak how this goes, and let's just take the work area down. So that's it. So we're getting the bounce up and then decrease, and we might just fine tune it a little bit, maybe even exaggerate it a bit. That's a bit more dramatic. And that will do. It's possibly a little bit slow. So we've also got this in the original animation. We had this little starburst at the end. And there are plenty of tutorials for circle bursts and starbursts online. So I'm not going to dwell too much on this beyond the very basics, but you can do lots of variations on these kinds of shapes fairly easily. So at the point at which the circle comes to, let's say around here, we want to start making the starburst. So for the starburst, we're just going to use a shape layer. You can see we've got one already here made up. So I'm just going to make one from start. So again, I want to make sure that my starburst is going to happen in the middle of this circle. Okay, so we're going to make a new shape layer. I can just draw one with the pen tool, or I can just make layer new shape. Try that, layer new shape layer. And our circle there is slightly off, so I'm going to move the center of our layer in there. And with that, I'm going to take the pen tool and I'm going to draw a line. So I'm pressing the shift to constrain it to a straight line. You can see I've got a stroke of 15 pixels on it. And I'm going to go in, let's go in and just change that stroke a little bit. So if I go into the contents of my shape layer. There's my shape, path, stroke. I'm going to change the stroke line cap to round cap. Gives you something like that. And we're going to add on a trim paths modifier. And with the trim paths, then we're going to do some animations. So just around this point, we wanted to start doing its thing. So with the trim path, I'm going to take the, in my trim paths there, open it out. I'm going to take the end and start with the end at 0. I'm going to keyframe it. Let's go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 keyframes ahead and set it to 100%. And you can make, as I said, all sorts of variations on these, but this will give us something like this. Okay, let's do a little bit of acceleration and deceleration. Zoom extents on the graph. So we want it to kind of accelerate out and ease in. Let's maybe make it a little bit more spectacular. We could also animate that's animating the end. We could also follow that by animating the start so that the start follows it a little bit. So if I keyframe the start now, and when we get to the end, I'm going to make the start follow it up like that, and we get something like that. So we're following up along that line. And then we could just take the start and go right up to the end at that stage. Let's do something like that. Okay, so we've got a little animation of a line using the trim paths. And as I said, there's lots and lots of other permutations of that. And then we're going to use the repeater, add repeater. Now, in order to see this repeater in action, we're going to need to take the playhead to a part of it when the line is evident. So you can see with the repeater there, it's giving us 2 repeated lines on the horizontal axis. So we want to change that around a little bit. So open out our repeater, and you can see there's the number of copies we have. And if we open out transforms, we can see that it's repeating 100 pixels on the x-axis between this. So we don't want that, put that to 0, because we want the repeater to happen on the rotation. So let's say if I give copies, let's say to about 8, and I'm going to change, instead of repeating on the position, I'm going to repeat on the rotation and just drag my slider around, do something like that. And that should give us our little starburst. You can mix and match those. For example, you might want to put a little opacity animation on it to fade it out. Let's just do that. Go to the shape layer, press T for opacity, keyframe it. Let's go to the end of the position and let's set it down to 0. And now we have something like that. Let's just fine tune that if I press the U key. And we're going to look at all of these together. Zoom extents. So we can play around with the timing of these. Slower, etc. So that's the basis of your starburst. And so altogether, we get something like this. So it's the kind of thing you can spend a lot of time fine tuning and playing with. If we go to the finished version as well, you can see I put in some sounds. So I just went to freesound.org. So if we go to share that and have a look at freesound.org. So in freesound.org, you can log in and you can search for various words like thunk, splat, whoosh, etc. And search by whatever terms you want and find little clips which you can play and download and import them into After Effects. So I've imported 4 different sounds here, which collectively give us let me just check that my share is correct. So we've got a sort of, I'll just play one sound at a time. So this first sound is a kind of a riser sound. It's just a background. So that sound was longer than I've needed. And if I open out the audio, you can see I've keyframed the audio levels to fade up and down at different points. If I open out the waveform, you can see I wanted it to be louder at this middle section. Right here, you can see the audio levels. I put a keyframe at -192, so they get a fade up to here where it's at the correct sound. I wanted, there's a little bit of a flourish in that soundtrack, so I just moved the layer so that that flourish happened at the time of the starburst. So if we go to this section, we have something like that. So that was the background sound. Then the next one, if I hide that one and turn on body fall, this is a nice one for the moment at which the rectangle hits the ground here like this. So body fall there, if I open it out, you can see we've got a waveform. Again, I've done a little bit of audio levels, and there's a little bit of a time remap which I'll leave out for the moment from this tutorial because it's another issue. But it gives this nice sense of just reaffirming the impact and helping us perceive the so hide that one and I turn on whoosh, and the whoosh then happens with the circular scale. I think that one was a Foley sound made with a bamboo in the air, but that's giving us a nice sense of the scale. It gives a good sense of that. Again, that whoosh, you can see if I open out the waveform, you can synchronize the placement with what's happening visually on screen. And I also threw in this little bell ring at the very start, which just, it's like it calls your attention before the rest of the action happens. So it's always a combination of a lot of little things that give something credible. And that's the sounds in this case just help to give that sense of something happening. So hope that was helpful, and talk to you in the next tutorial.